All right, we're going to get started. Hello and welcome. Thank you all for coming. We're really excited for this event. I'm Nicole Morris and I'm co-founder of AI Portland. I want to take a quick moment to thank some of our sponsors. First, I'd like to thank Wacom, specifically our friend Megan, for lending us this amazing space. Thanks to the Technology Association of Oregon, they provided us our lunch today. And then thank you to 52 Limited, Silicon Florist, and Goat Digital. Our sponsors make it possible for us to have events like this. If you are interested in sponsoring or your company, come see me after the event. Just a little bit about AI Portland if you're not familiar with us. We are an organization that Megan and I started this last year. We hold events like these. We also facilitate panels, host speakers, and various events. Our ethos really is to create conversation, connection, education around different themes of AI. We also are super passionate about creating community here in Portland and just creating an inclusive and accessible space for us all to get on the AI train together. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce my fellow co-founder, Megan Notarte, and a man who needs no introduction, Senator Ron Wyden.
Here's your mic, and you want to kick off your remarks. Yeah, hopefully the mic is going. I think you're on. Yeah, they go. You're going to kick us off with some remarks, I think.
We're going to have fun. You go start.
Oh, no, we're starting with you. You've got some thoughts?
I heard you guys were interested in the speech. Not going to happen. It's going to be a filibuster-free zone, okay? Let me start it this way. Take a guess at how many United States senators were using a computer when I arrived in the United States Senate. I heard 3.
One.
Let's see, we're going over here.
5. We got a 5. We got a 0 back there. Yeah, 2.
Megan, why'd you say 1?
Because I feel like it was you.
No, it wasn't.
No?
Because I was coming from the House, and I was
Technicality.
One United States Senator, Patrick Leahy, was using a computer, and I showed up in the Senate. I was Oregon's first new senator in 30 years. And basically, I said, we've always been about wood products and ag and all the rest. I'm going to get us into some new stuff. And I'm the son of a journalist. And I grew up asking a lot of questions. And I got a chance to write the digital signatures law. I wrote Section 230, the platform statute. I wrote the Internet Tax Non-Discrimination Act. And I was just like a pig in the slop. It was so phenomenally interesting. And I learned a couple of kind of core principles at that point beyond asking questions. And I established the rules that still guide me today, which is that this is not supposed to be about just making life happy for the big corporations. It's supposed to be about users, and it's supposed to be about innovation. And we're all getting started, on AI, and everybody says, well, do senators even know what AI is? And it's a pattern matching machine, if you're going to ask me that. But we got a lot to learn, and it can be something that we can use for great good, but it's also stuff that has some downside. And when I was in the Senate, I wrote the first AI bill, the Algorithmic Accountability Act. And now I go to the high schools and they say, That old guy knows what an algorithm is. So let's have some fun for the next few minutes. Go ahead.
Perfect. So I'm going to start somewhere maybe a little unexpected for this crowd, but I know that housing and rent prices have been like a hot topic in this election cycle on the campaign trail. And I know you've done a lot of work on housing generally, and you've introduced legislation to address how AI specifically is impacting rents across the country. Can you tell us a little bit about that and maybe what you think needs to be done to address the issue?
Let me start you with housing, and we'll nudge our way into a little broader discussion. First, Democrats are not supposed to call themselves supply-siders. Have you heard that, about economics, and the Democrats get up and say, we hate supply-siders and all the rest? I want everybody to know I am a supply-sider when it comes to housing. We have got to increase the supply. And so I have two bills, something called LIHTC, the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit, then a proposal for middle-income folks called the Middle-Income Housing Tax Credit. But I want to make sure that there is consumer protections baked in to whatever we do. So when I learned that shady tech companies were using algorithms to help some landlords collude to inflate rents, I said, we're going to go after this, which is where we are now. It's in front of the Federal Trade Commission. And without putting everybody to sleep, let me just kind of read you a little bit from the text of it. The legislation makes sure that when companies are combining information from other rental properties and then using an algorithm to suggest rent increases, sometimes in the double digits, that's going to make whole cities less affordable for renters. And that constitutes the kind of collusion I'm concerned about. Now, remember, I'm a little older than most of the people in this room, but collusion used to be a couple of big, beefy guys going down to a steakhouse and setting prices. That's still kind of what's going on with algorithms. So, the steakhouse may be getting a little less business from a standpoint of what they were hoping to do in terms of price setting, but all of us in the consumer rights area are concerned that we want to increase supply. That's economics. By the way, I'm also a supply-sider on childcare, because I think we need to expand childcare. But we need to protect consumers. So there are two sides of one coin. That was a longer answer than you wanted, but that's kind of looking at it.
You mentioned having been around the Senate for a while.
200 years.
200 years. You heard it. Can we switch mics, actually? Can I switch mics with you? Because I'm really loud, and I probably don't need it. Okay. So anyway, you've mentioned being around for roughly 200 years. And, so you've seen the rise of the internet, the rise of social media, the rise of mobile phones, and now the beginning of the rise of AI. And I know as a person who works in tech, I find it exhausting and very difficult to keep up. So I'm curious, from where you sit, how you keep up and how you assess the general technical aptitude of Congress. Now, we've come from maybe more than one senator having a computer.
It has come a long way. Remember, there were hearings not too long ago where powerful senators were asking Mark Zuckerberg how he made money at Facebook. And so, there's been a lot of progress. What I will tell you is I showed up and I said I have a chance to get into these emerging technologies. And the first one we bumped up against was 230. There's a whole book out called The 26 Words That Created the Internet. And my wife owns a Strand bookstore in New York City. She looked at this book and she goes, "You created the internet? Why haven't I seen any of it?" And the reality was that was one of the threshold questions. And I personally made the judgment then that individual responsibility matters a lot, and the person who posts on a platform is going to be the person who's going to be accountable. Now, we've had a bunch of big debates, we should change it, all this kind of thing. But I'll tell you, back then, I was concerned about people without power and without clout. I still am. I personally believe, how many of you think things like 230 should be modified and the platform rules should be changed? Okay, some.
We got
It would
some
be
hands.
more if I wasn't asking the question.
If I asked it, would they say something different?
But the point really is, I was interested then, and I said it to you guys at the beginning, for the people who don't have clout and the people who don't have power. And I will give you my own judgment that the Me Too movement could never have gotten off the ground without Section 230. Because nobody would have put those big old celebrities with their giant contracts and their big national names and their limos, they wouldn't have put them out there to have them say, we're going to sue everybody in sight and all the rest. So that's kind of how I began, but it's always been about users and innovation. My wife has heard me speak on this. She said, sounds like a law firm, users and innovation, attorneys of law, that's all you talk about, users and innovation. Well, if you want to give opportunities, I'm looking around the room and I don't think very many people showed up here in limousines and stuff. And I don't see too many French shirts with French cuffs and all the rest. I see a lot of people who are interested in ideas and want to be rewarded for it. And I like to think I built the frames with digital signatures, 230, internet tax non-discrimination, that's going to give you a chance to flourish. Shoot, we got, AI companies trying to, buy up everybody's talent without buying the whole company because they don't want to get busted by the antitrust people. So the gaming has begun, folks. The game, make no mistake about it, the gaming has begun. That was a longer answer than you wanted. But.
I feel like that's consistent. It's okay. I wanted to talk a little bit about federal privacy law. So in the legislative plan that Senator Schumer put out in May, they recommended creating a federal data privacy law. 130 countries in the world have some sort of federal data privacy law, and we do not. And these laws tend to form the foundation for how technologies like AI can operate. What do you think it will take to get this accomplished here in the U.S., the federal level?
Political guts.
Yeah. All right.
Taking on the lobbies. Let me tell you what we learned a couple of months ago. These data brokers, have you followed these guys? These are some of the sleaziest people on the face of the earth because they're buying up everybody's stuff. There are no rules. There's no nothing. A data broker basically data broker got geolocation data on 600 Planned Parenthood organizations. 600 Planned Parenthood offices. Now think about what that kind of data is worth to other sleazy people who want to use it for sleazy political purposes. So we got to have a national law. This is an Exxon Valdez waiting to happen. You can see it already in terms of privacy violations. If the feds keep dragging their feet, of course I favor states moving ahead of their own volition in a bolder kind of way because we can't leave people without any protection. But the real answer is a tough, standardized, with teeth privacy law. And the thing that's holding us up is not somebody lost their drafter down at the Legislative Council's office. It's a question of political will. Plain and simple. And if you look at a bunch of these laws, some of them end up 98-1 or 98-2, and you can guess who's the 2. And that's me, because a lot of these laws sound good and don't do much, like the sex trafficking law. Sex trafficking law was heralded as this big bonanza and all that. The only thing that happened is it drove the bad guys into the dark web, where you didn't get anything on them at all. So my counsel is, as you get into the space, read the actual print. It's not that fine print. You can read it.
You mentioned states taking action, and we see that happen when the federal government doesn't take action. What are the risks and benefits of states doing that? And then are there benefits to Oregon if Oregon were to have specific AI legislation?
Well, the risk is you have a crazy quilt. You know, everybody in politics always goes, "Elect me, I'm going to compete with China." You know, remember you hear all that, "I'm going to be the one, we're going to beat China's pants off when we have my laws and stuff." Well, if you're going to be serious about that, and lots of people in politics aren't, they like the soundbite, you can't have a crazy quilt, because the kinds of things we're talking about are inherently not just intrastate within the boundaries of Oregon, but they're interstate, they're global, they're national, and the rest. So you really need something with teeth that's standardized. And I get the frustration. Until we have that, we're going to have to get the best out of the states that we can.
Great. You mentioned how AI is being used more frequently in decision making, right? We're talking about algorithms making decisions that people are not aware of. What legislative steps do you think are necessary to ensure transparency and accountability in AI systems, especially about when we're talking privacy and algorithmic bias?
Well, what we decided coming out of the gate, before we had all these grandiose ideas for changing the world, we thought we ought to stick with the basics, because a lot of people are being discriminated against, you know, right now. So, for example, in my Algorithmic Accountability Act, we concentrate on making sure people aren't discriminated against when they're getting hired for a job, or when they can rent an apartment, or what school and what healthcare they're going to attend. And we force a lot of disclosure and transparency up front, so that we're in a position to actually know how they make their judgments, what the biases are. Because remember, an algorithm and things like that is not some neutral kind of creature. You're bringing your biases, the biases are baked in. So that's the kind of initial policy that we brought to this. And I think it's sort of in the same vein that I've gone at technology and healthcare. We brought telemedicine, we brought digital signatures. We said, there's no question AI is going to help a lot in healthcare, but we're already starting to see signs of very substantial bias. There's a professor at the University of Washington whose study I will quote from voluminously if that's the next question I get.
A question about healthcare?
Wasn't that what you wanted to ask? I got this elaborate thing from
We're nothing if not prepared.
So get this. Yeah. There's a professor up the road from us, Dr. Ziad Obermeyer, who is at the University of Washington, who found a huge amount of bias in an AI tool developed by the healthcare company Optum. Now, Optum, you may know, is a subsidiary of the United Health Group, which has singularly been doing a disservice to the American people with things like their cybersecurity policy. You guys know about Change Health? Anybody ever heard of it? Biggest healthcare hack ever. United Health handles about 30% of all health practices. We had a hearing on it, and I walked out of there and said, this is Exhibit A for what not to do in cybersecurity. They didn't use multi-factor authentication. The CEO knew that they had a problem with their first server, and they didn't do anything about it. The cyber guy from the staff told them, you got a problem. They didn't do anything about it. And then they didn't have any redundancy on the back end. So there were all these people waiting in line to get paid and all the rest. So what goes on in healthcare is going to be huge. Anyway, Dr. Ziad Obermeyer found that an algorithm tool used by Optum, part of this outfit, United Healthcare, required black patients to present with worse symptoms than white patients in order to get the same quality level of care. Now, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to read that, to say that's fundamentally wrong. It's contrary to all the civil rights laws that we've got. It's something that shouldn't be tolerated. But I had to have a hearing before anybody ever heard about it. So we're kind of in that stage, and we're going to accelerate the pace, because particularly in health, so many of the technologies present two sides of the same coin. A side that says you can make great gains and be able to find cancers and all kinds of tremendous things, but have big downsides, like Dr. Ziad Obermeyer found at this gigantic healthcare giant that couldn't even put in place multi-factor authentication, which everybody knows if they just get a little kind of message from their bank, you know, how their accounts are faring and stuff like that. I mean, it's pretty bad stuff. So we're spending a lot of time on healthcare.
Can I ask what your view is of like what the role of the federal government in making sure that these concerns in healthcare are addressed?
Well, I'm chairman of the Senate Finance Committee. We have jurisdiction over Medicare, Medicaid, CHIPS, and particularly the tax laws that all of you use when you get your health care coverage. And so we're going to spend about $4.5 trillion this year on health care. Get this math. There are 330 million of us. You divide 330 million into 4.5 trillion, and you could send every family of 4 in America a check for $60,000. Send them a check for 60 grand and say, here's your health care, have a nice day. We're not getting enough for our money, and particularly in the areas of Medicare, Medicaid, CHIPS, the tax exclusion. How many of you got a policy from your employer? Okay, lots of people. That's what I'm talking about with the tax exclusion. This comes from the 1940s. Literally, 1940s. We got out of the war, won the war, we're happy all our guys are home and all that. And everybody wanted them to have health care. And nobody knew how to do it. So they said, let's just put it on the business and they can take a tax break. And the business people said, what you would expect, we'll do it. But that doesn't mean it's free. And we've had that same healthcare system essentially for 160 million Americans or more since 1944. And I and others would like to modernize it, and a big part of it would involve AI.
You mentioned earlier, switching gears a little bit, about the balance of users and innovation. And I know you're also a big proponent of like advances in technology, but also strong consumer privacy protections. How do we strike that balance between fostering innovation, but also ensuring proper regulations?
Well, I think the Algorithmic Accountability Act is a pretty good example because we stake the ground that we take a gentle kind of hand at the beginning. You know, we don't establish a new federal agency with 4,000 employees to stamp anytime you want to do anything. But we go after the big consumer protection areas. People getting a job, people getting their health care, people getting an apartment. I mean, this for me, as long as I'm doing it, as long as I have the honor to be your United States Senator and be marginally coherent in terms of technology, I'm going to talk about users and innovation. And that was why it was so outrageous. And we stepped in when a couple of the big companies were trying to buy up all the employees of all the other employers, but didn't want to buy the whole company because they'd get busted. And we started screaming our lungs out. And apparently it's caused some of them to be a little bit more cautious. And I guess, I don't know how you want to do it, Morgan, if you want to have me continue or whatever, but these are the issues of our time. I just came from a meeting with a big group of students. We're talking about, the Balmer Institute using new approaches in terms of healthcare. They're going to be using AI, those students, pretty soon. So I think you guys are on the right side of history. People ask me what I do, and I say I recruit our staffers. I went to school on a basketball scholarship, dreaming of playing in the NBA. It's a ridiculous idea. But I tell everybody we're starting another season. I did get a scholarship offer. I went to Cal, Santa Barbara, but I got a scholarship offer from Gonzaga, which is a big basketball power, big deal. And the reason I put it up on the wall is I wanted to be able to prove that even though if I had gone to Gonzaga, I would have sat on the bench even more than I did at Cal. But I could have shown forever that Jewish kids can play with the Jesuits. So we recruit our tech staff like we're recruiting LeBron James. We've got computer scientists, the staff's here, we got computer scientists, we got all kinds of rock stars of technology. Our star staffer is Chris Segoyan, who probably is the most sought after employee in the United States because he's so talented and does a lot of our stuff. but you guys are on the right side of history. If I was starting in public service, I'd be looking for ways to dig in with all of you. So why don't we do this, unless you got anything else?
I just have one question before we open for Q&A.
Yeah.
It's just one more.
Yeah.
How are you using generative AI? Or are you? Is it proving helpful?
Well, modestly. And remember, all of AI, almost all of it, is generative. For example, as the whole debate got started in the Senate, the press one day got up and said, well, Ron, are you going to apply Section 230 to AI? And my buddy, who I wrote the law with, a Republican, we do everything together, and I tried to get him on the phone, and I couldn't get him, and so I just got up and said, look, AI is virtually all generative. There are some instances where it will resemble 230, which protects hosts. So there are some instances where the lines kind of blur, but it's overwhelmingly generative. And the Section 230 law applies to people hosting. They put stuff up on a platform. So here's where I and the staff can chime in a little bit. We have folks experimenting with chatbots and looking at GPT and Gemini, and we use it mostly for drafting documents and looking at drafts and stuff like that. And my guess is that before too long, we'll use it a lot for office logistics and organizing the place, which I think is common. But that's about where we are. And I, always try to, talk about technology in a way that, reflects that I realize how fast it is, changing. In fact, often my wife and I are older, parents. I mentioned my wife in her bookstore, that she goes to something and they say, well, your husband is a big expert in technology, and the whole family rolls their eyes. It's like, yeah, right. He watches games, he texts, he does this kind of stuff and all the rest. So I think there's enormous potential here, and we're trying to carve out sensible, practical ways to build. I think, for example, the Algorithmic Accountability Act may be one of the first big bills in a Senate package next year. In other words, we've been warming up. We've been, shooting baskets by ourselves and all the rest. But I think the Algorithmic Accountability Act, Algorithmic Accountability Act has almost all of the sponsors of the Senate relevant committees on it. So I think that may be where we start. Softball questions will be particularly welcome, because I got up this morning trying to help a few of my friends, keep their seats in the Senate, and it's an early morning.
Oh, all right. So let's be kind.
Yeah.
So Nicole has a mic over here. If you raise your hand, we'll make our way around. All right.
Hi, Senator. My name is Olga. I'm a huge fan. I am a privacy expert and a bit of a nerd.
Privacy?
Privacy, correct. So a bit of a nerd, like you and me, and maybe lots of people in this room. Whenever I talk about privacy to people in my life who are not wonks, they want to make me a foil hat and send me on my way. So, this is kind of a preaching to the choir situation. We all want to know, we want to be involved. But for the wider audience, how would you recommend, what would be the messaging for battling apathy from kind of all generations of Americans? And in comparison maybe to Europe, but in addition to the legislative milestones that you have, how would you say that
I missed a few of the words in the middle, but towards the end, I think you said, how would I describe these issues to people, privacy issues and the like?
How would you combat the apathy that the kind of the standard American digital user has towards kind of so what's the big deal? So they have my data, and so what?
I tell them this is a national security issue for you. I've had these companies, we have maybe a handful of open sessions in the Intelligence Committee. I sit on the Intelligence Committee as well. My older child calls it the so-called Intelligence Committee. And we had the biggest companies. And I said, do you regard privacy as a national security issue? And the first thing they said is absolutely. Because if hostile foreign powers have your personal information, they can basically wreck your life. That's how I say it. And there are huge surveillance questions that I also spend a lot of time on. Some of you may have watched the tape. Mr. Snowden said this was the tape that made him do what he did. I asked James Clapper, the head of national intelligence, whether the government collected any type of data at all on millions or hundreds of millions of Americans. And he lied. And he said no. And he knew that wasn't right. And so people are beginning to get the stakes.
Yeah, stand up with your question. And the mic is a little weird, so you might want to have Nicole hold on to it. But all right.
All right. My name is Hector Dominguez. I go by him pronouns. I work for the city of Portland. I'm coordinating open data privacy, surveillance technologies, and AI for the city. In local government, we are very enthusiastic, particularly Portland. You know, we are part of this community. Many of my colleagues, many programs are very enthusiastic about jumping into AI. However, everything has a cost. So it's quite expensive, like getting all these services around AI, independently, of course, of all the privacy concerns, which is our job right now. But it's really expensive to pay for that. It's very expensive also to get talent to work for local government and compete with private sector, for instance, and then at the end, provide the service that we want to provide to all Portlanders, right? It's a big challenge there. And Portland, at the scale of Portland, is
Megan, did you say this was a softball question?
I did ask for softball questions.
Yeah.
Go ahead. You're asking a great
Anyways,
question.
yeah. So I was just wondering, what is your take from your perspective around supporting the deployment of AI through all this
Great question.
layers?
Look, I have had 1,101 town hall meetings. This was part of a pledge that I made to Oregon. Nobody had ever done this. We were choosing our first new senator in 3 decades. I said, I'll throw open the doors of government to everybody, and I'll be there in your county. We have 36 counties. I go to every one of them. A lot of the counties have almost more animals than there are people. As my wife points out, the animals might not support me as well. And let me be serious about your question, because it's one I think about all the time. Many people today believe the government can't organize a 2-car parade. That's just a fact. So at the city level, as you know, we've had some tough jolts here. Homelessness, fentanyl, housing. We got to add a bunch of things. One of the reasons I pushed so hard for the WNBA team, and we were successful. Everybody said, oh, Ron did it because he was a basketball player. Yes, I did it because I love basketball. But also, I think women's sports is really on the ascent. Even if you're not a big fan, it's really on the ascent. So we got to choose a few good things. And what I've tried to do on my side of the ledger with the algorithms is talk about things that people will say, that helps me. That is a good use of my tax dollar. That's not a bunch of people in one of these buildings downtown off on some, exotic thing. They look at the Algorithmic Accountability Act, they say, that might protect my job. They look at the Algorithmic Accountability Act, it might protect my roof over my head. So if I were you, and I was at the city, I'd proceed in a kind of deliberative kind of fashion. And you want my 2 cents worth, that's what I try to do, because I heard a rumor there was a presidential election coming up and other elections. Not going to get into that, but you're seeing some of these same kinds of issues front and center there.
Over here? Yeah. Please stand up so we can see you. Thank you.
Hi, I have an AI startup that just went live yesterday, and
Tell us about it.
oh, it's a big problem. It's got all kinds. If I tell you about it, it's not
Well,
going to
what is beyond the problem?
Sure,
what is it designed to
we
do?
let you in about 5 minutes create an AI clone of yourself, your voice.
I don't think people would like that.
Yeah, so we won't do any of you without your permission, I promise.
Taylor Swift, maybe, not me.
So my softball question is more to ask you to comfort me, because the regulations that came from California were on top of the ones in Tennessee, on top of all the patchwork that you mentioned. And on the one hand, I'm concerned about almost any kind of regulation for a small company. And the other thing that concerns me is I see a parade of big tech companies sort of advising Congress, and a lot of them benefit.
Well, you heard that was why I moved so quickly when they started to try to buy up all the talent without taking the responsibility side that they would if they bought the whole company. So you got me at hello, no matter what else you say.
Well, so my concern is some of these things that pass in California impact my business, and it's very expensive to have to navigate that. If the federal government passes some regulations, will the states still be able to do their thing and it still just be a patchwork? Or can you put things like 230 that will maybe make it easier for companies to launch? This is, having done this longer than you've been a senator in the tech world, this is the only time I can remember people rushing so much to regulate a new technology before it's really mature in any way.
Well, there are a couple reasons. First is big tech has certainly done a whole host of things that have given a bad taste in the mouth the American people. It's why I made a big point early on, and I saw some of you up here in the front row kind of wondering where I was going. It wasn't the weave or something that Donald Trump is always talking about. But I've said from the very beginning, this was about the people who don't have power and don't have clout. They're the ones. By the way, Mark Zuckerberg came to my office when he was just that person. And he came and he was very young and he looked like he'd purchased a blue blazer at J. Crew, and he had a little red tie, and he was reading a statement. It's great to see you, Senator Wyden, you blah, 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 blah. So a lot of the guys who are big don't remember when they were little. And so what we've got to do is put on a kind of set of blinders to talk about innovation, talk about users, watching the big guys who are always trying to take an advantage. And apropos of the states get frustrated, after a while you start to come to best practices, which is something that's constructive, and you can start building a national law around, hey, 5 states are doing this and seems to be working pretty well. Let's put it into a federal statute. It's a very good question, and I don't pretend to say there's a quick answer.
Way in the back here.
Hi, Senator Wyden. My name's Tiffany. I work at a nonprofit called Jobs for the Future, and we're really focused on making sure more people have access to quality jobs, which AI is obviously impacting. So how are you thinking about policies to support workers who may be displaced, but also workers who might need to retrain, reskill for the jobs that are being created?
I believe what the country needs is what amounts to a lifelong training program, because people are going to change their jobs something like 12 times while they're still fairly young, and it's only going to continue. And so you can try to put brakes on new technology, which people have done for gazillions of years, and find it doesn't work, or you can say, look, let's give people a chance to be upwardly mobile and get access to training and opportunities to continue to grow. And it's something I'm working on. Probably start with healthcare, because there are a lot of healthcare jobs at hand.
Mr. Wyden, I'm Holly Wagner. I work for Workforce Innovation, Trust, and Influence, and I would like to specifically ask around the workforce stuff and expand upon that for people who don't have access, who are not a part of the upper education or don't have direct paths for the educational system, and how we can handle people who are like out of work and that kind of stuff, how we extend that more.
We're looking, for example, now at how we can put in place a fast track for an apprenticeship program for nurses, because we desperately need more of them. And we're going to need something to expedite it because it just goes too slow.
Hi, Senator Wyden. My name's Jason. I'm one of Megan's business partners. And we spent some time earlier this year trying to look at how to make decisions about AI in an ethical way. And one of the things that we ran into a lot of trouble with is it's incredibly hard to get information about the environmental impact of particular engines or the ethics of engines, how their models are trained. I just wondered if you've looked at anything around that.
You're being logical, and heaven forbid that logic breaks out. I'm looking specifically at some kind of environmental disclosure for some of these questions.
Hi, Senator. First, thank you for all the work that you've done for us as Oregonians over the years. Really big fan of your work. I wrote this before, and I have a little bit of context, so sorry for the length. My name is Weston Cox. I'm the director of Tomorrow Labs, a Portland-based organization working to bridge the digital divide for offline communities in developing countries. I've been a big supporter of yours, and thank you for coming to speak with us today regarding AI and digital information and communications technology upon which all of this AI conversation depends. As humans first, as well as with my work in developing countries and your incredible record regarding internet access, information freedom, I know that we both share massive respect for the freedom of access to information as afforded to us as humans by Article 19 of the UN's Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and I think we all agree on that. But now, unfortunately, for almost 3 decades, telecommunications blackouts have been used as a weapon of violence against people of Gaza, and it's once again happened in northern Gaza this week as people I know were being exterminated. I feel it's imperative that I speak out about repeated use of telecommunications blackouts as yet another weapon of violence against innocent civilians, which violates Article 19, and ask you to please call for an immediate ceasefire and an arms embargo in accordance with both domestic and international law. We as a nation and a society are already complicit in the live stream genocide that we are seeing, and it needs to stop now. So Senator, please continue your record of leadership and speak out against these telecommunications blackouts that are against both domestic and international law. Thank you.
So obviously this puts front and center the Middle East, and since I'm on the Intelligence Committee, there are some things I can't, talk about. Look, I very much want, before he leaves office, I want President Biden to have his name on a ceasefire, a significant ceasefire, 6 months, whatever it takes to give us a chance to we got to get the hostages out. We've got to deal with humanitarian aid, getting it in. I'm a Jew, a first-generation Jew. My parents fled the Nazis in the 30s. Not everybody got out. My dad was one of the Ritchie boys, the famous German kids that were in the army, talked their way into the army to drop propaganda pamphlets on Hitler. So I never, ever imagined October 7th in the United States. I mean, I never imagined it in anything that was part, of my life. So I see everything in the Middle East with one kind of prism, and that is I want a better life for Jewish moms, and I want a better life for Palestinian moms. That's what I want. And we may just have a window right now to start in on it seriously. It isn't going to happen in 5 minutes, but it looks like there may be some oxygen for a real breakthrough. Sinwar, all the changes that we've seen in the last couple couple of weeks. But you know what I've been to the region a number of times. I always come away with the same kind of judgment. We're better than this. We can fix this. We can come up with a plan after God only knows how many years, because we can help. We're Americans. And I'll just leave you with this thought because it relates to my position on Israel and everything else. I never thought coming up I would have an opportunity like this to be a public official in the best place around. Never, ever, thought it. So this has been an incredible honor, and I'm going to do my best, as long as I represent you in the United States Senate, to try to bring people together. My biggest anger at Donald Trump transcends any policy. It's that he's constantly pitting people against each other. We're better than this. That's what I'm going to try to be part of. Your question is fair game. We need a comprehensive plan. We need it soon. And I'm going to put today's meeting, as a chairman, I can once in a while do this, usually make big motions and all that kind of stuff. There hadn't been a bad question in the House, not one, not a bad point. And I'm going to make a motion now from myself that this discussion with AI Oregon be continued. I hear no objection. Megan, it's ordered. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. We've got a lot of more events coming up. Check out our website. We'll be around for a second. Thank you.
Cool. Ramy. Yeah. Excellent. Yeah. Great job.
Okay, then you have the backlight. And then I want to get a photo after this with that includes Megan. Like, okay, I'm going to get the three of them.